Six, so I'll be able to have a quorum.
One day I told you we're going to call
Yeah. Spring of 1980.
It was February of 1980. I remember the day. 24 years and about a month ago since we were aware of each other's existence. February 1980.
Mercy. I was at the student at George Washington University. I had my only link with civilization, the Farmville Herald, that came that day. And there was this article about some crazy madman at Longwood trying to start some archaeology field school. And I said, I must meet this man and become part of this endeavor. And I did. For 3 summers was part of it and enjoyed every minute of it. And, well, I just want to introduce to you tonight my colleague and mentor in field archaeology, Dr. James W. Jordan. Thank you so much.
Everything that's useful is going to be on those 2 tables, which have become a slide stream this evening. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a slide. This isn't the first one, but I'm going to put a slide up there. There, that's the one I'll put up there. Now, what I'd like for you to do very much is please shift around so you can see the screen comfortably. If you're really uncomfortable now, 3 hours and 10 minutes from now, you're going to be damn uncomfortable because that's when I'm summing everything up. So please don't be uncomfortable now. Please move to where you're comfortable. And I'm going to ask Mr. President, do you think we could get another one of those tables, Mr. President, and just lean it up against the center of that window there, and that would keep the light from coming right on the screen. Do you think that would be possible? Yeah. I'm very sorry that we're having to, do all this pushing and shoving on your time. I do apologize for that, but we hadn't anticipated the light coming in these 2 windows, nor had we anticipated the fact that there wasn't going to be a screen here, and I take responsibility for both of those things. I came down here last evening. It was about 10:15. I teach an evening class down at the community college in Keysville in anthropology, and I came around for 2 reasons. One reason I'm not going to tell you because it's illegal. That reason was I put 9 coins down on the track out there. I used to do that 25 years ago when my daughters and I would come down here and put coins on the track and then come back the next day and get them, when they were all crushed. I would like to get coins crushed again one last time by that train out there. So actually I put down 9 coins out there. I can't find any of them this morning. I don't know what happened to them. There were quarters, nickels, dimes, and pennies. And I also noticed that light was shining right in the window, and I tried to break the light, but I was unable to break it. And now we found out you can't turn it off either. So we're going to fix that light by putting a table up and right over it. And that'll make the slides on the screen show up a little better. So you are now busy shifting around so that you're comfortable. And the stage crew, they're with the band, they're going to put this table up on end, and then we'll be ready to go. Yeah, that'll fall on me, but that's okay. It's my own fault. It's my own fault. We could get in the paper for this. College teachers seriously injured. Does anyone know when the last trains are coming down the track out there? How long will they be running before they stop? Through April. Okay, you've got a good many more nights.
Bob, is there any hangers here? Any hangers here?
I don't think so. Maybe in the back room.
Because if you have a hanger, you can hang sweaters and coats on that sill.
That's okay. The title of my presentation this evening is The Girls on High Street. An archaeologist looks at 165 years of Farmville and Longwood. And I do appreciate very much the opportunity to speak this evening to the Farmville Prince Edward Historical Society. It means a great deal for me to be involved in the 250th anniversary of the founding of our county. It was a dark and stormy night, and this is not High Street here. But I wanted to show you this slide, because in this slide, there is the most important thing in the whole wide world from an archaeological point of view. You understand what I mean? My students think that I think that the most important thing in the world are projectile points, you know, arrowheads or spearheads, or pieces of broken prehistoric pottery, or trash pits where Indians are discarding the remains of their food and clothing and so on. And those are important. That's what archaeologists look for. But what we're really on the trail of are human beings. And we use those archaeological artifacts as a way to get to the human beings who are no longer here and able to speak to us. So the first slide I've chosen to show this evening is not on High Street, although it does have some girls from High Street, students at Longwood College. This is the second day of July in the year 1980, and I want to tell you that the president of the Farmville Prince Edward Historical Society is in this picture. This is underneath a canopy. I mean, you think we had to rig things up. We, in the first year of the archaeology field school at Longwood College, didn't literally have a pot to go to the bathroom in. So Bob Flippin found a way to steal parachutes from the National Guard, and Bob Flippin, your president, found a way to relieve a local lumber company of big 4x4s, and Bob Flippin, your president, he put it all together and made us a sunscreen, and that's our thermometer, and this is July 2nd, 1980. It was a Wednesday. July 4th that year was a Friday, and it was 102 degrees on the thermometer at our archaeological site on the banks of the Willis River in Cumberland County. Bob, do you remember the name of that archaeological site where you and I first worked in the dirt?
44CM8.
44CM8?
Anna's Ridge.
The Anna's Ridge archaeological site. Now, which person here is your president on that hot, sweaty afternoon? We had just had lunch, and the troops were not enthusiastic about going back out into the sun to dig. Is that your president there? Yeah. Is this Bob Flippin? Could that be Bob Flippin? No. This thing right here, this pile of dirty clothing, that's Bob Flippin. This is your president. He's got his head in Mary Ellen Munoz's lap. She was a nurse, you know, and she was ministering to Bob and saying, Bob, I know you're from Washington, D.C., and you think you're pretty hot stuff, you know, go to that expensive school up here and everything, but Bob, you're going to have to get yourself up and get out there in the sun, or Jordan is really going to get angry. So there's a picture of your president. I'm sorry that you can't see his face. Usually when I came around with a camera, he turned around backwards. This is your president right here. This is at a different archaeological site, and once again he's turned his rear end towards me. Even though I was the guy giving him the grade, for some reason he never liked to face me. Here we are at the Smith-Taylor Mound, right down here at the junction of Buffalo Creek and the Appomattox River. You know that has figured prominently into a novel recently about Lazar Plantation. So there's your president too. Now, I want to show you another person. Remember, these first three slides are focusing on the things that are really important in archaeology, and those things are human beings. Now, here we are at the Smith-Taylor Mound archaeological site. Prehistoric Indian mound, 16 feet tall, erosion-resistant clay. If you guys want to, we can can the rest of this lecture. We could be down there in 15 minutes. We'll just go out and go right down 460, over the bridge, in front of the fire station, take a right, and in 15 minutes we could be standing back there. It'd probably be pretty cold and muddy, and maybe we shouldn't do it. But he went back there that day. You recognize that guy right there?
Chuck Robb.
Yeah, Chuck Robb. He was the governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia at that time. He's not the important person in that picture. This is the important person right here. And that man is with us here this evening. Does anyone recognize Robert Taylor? Robert Taylor didn't like the politics of Chuck Robb at all, and he wouldn't stand beside the governor to get his picture taken. In fact, I think Robert was trying to push the governor over into that big pile of dirt right there. Robert, remember that day when you were out there? That was back in 1983, that day right there. We were all a lot younger then, and the water was running pure and the grass was green. And that's important. It's important to think about the past. I like to think about the past. In fact, I believe the past is more fun. It's often a better place to be than the present is. Maybe that's just a sign of something that's wrong with me, but I enjoy very much living in the past. And I suspect that some of you feel sort of that way also. The future is going to come to us no matter what we want to do. There's no doubt about it. The future is always going to be here. It comes at us 1,000 million miles an hour. And I'm glad that I am supposed to tell my students, now you must get ready for the future. The future will be challenging. You or learn new skills and all that kind of stuff, you know, the teachers are supposed to tell their students. And I think in part that is true. But I also firmly believe that you need to prepare for the past also, because the past is not rushing at us. It's getting further and further away every minute. Unless we self-consciously reach out to grab the past, someday it will be utterly gone, and there won't be anything here but the future. And when that time comes, I honestly hope that, well, I don't know what I hope, but I don't think it's going to be a real good time if we let the past get away from us. So, my presentation this evening is focusing on how it came to be in the past, in Farmville, that there got to be a bunch of girls living on High Street. Once upon a time on High Street. That picture was taken the year that I came to Longwood, 1978. And some of the old timers I know are looking at that aerial view of the college and probably seeing things that, that are there now but aren't there in that picture, like, the new gymnasium, for example, at Longwood isn't in that picture there. Why in the world, of all the places in the world, did there get to be a school for young ladies in Farmville, Virginia? Part of the answer to that question begins with the stagecoach route. You guys remember it, man. You could buy a ticket, and you could ride from what is now Washington, D.C., down to Halifax in North Carolina. It only took 4 days on the stagecoach, 3 days, 3 nights, and 4 days. It cost roughly about $2.75 in money in that time to take the ride. And the second stop, going from Washington, D.C. to Halifax in North Carolina, was in Farmville, Virginia. You could spend the evening in Farmville, Virginia in the Eagle Hotel. That was pretty high class. The chances were real good that you would not share a bed with anyone in the Eagle Hotel. But in the Farmville Tavern, the chances were nearly zero that you would not be sharing a bed with someone. In fact, perhaps someone that you didn't even know and might not like. Well, the fact that there was this stagecoach route running north to south and the Appomattox River running east to west made this spot a natural for, as they say nowadays, development. And as you and I know, on the 5th day of March in the year 1839, 7 worthy white men, all parishioners at the Farmville Methodist Church, which had been built just 3 years before that, they got together, reached out in their pocket, came up with nearly $30,000, and on the 5th day of March, 1839, had a piece of paper from the Commonwealth of Virginia certifying that they had become the incorporators of the Farmville Female Seminary. The first bricks and stones were laid in the fall of 1839. You understand Longwood University just had its 165th birthday on Friday of last week. Friday of last week was spring break's first day, and all of my students were on the way to Panama City and Yost Van Dyke, and I was at home watching the Weather Channel that morning, praying that there'd be sleet and hail and real bad weather every place south of Georgia. I hope every year that spring break, because my mommy would never let me go on spring break, and I've never forgotten it, and I just hate that all of my students go down to those places and have a good time. It almost worked this year. Pensacola, Florida, actually had a day when the temperature got down to 46 degrees over spring break, so my prayers were almost answered. Well, at any rate, fall of 1839, the first stones were laid, and on the 26th day of April in 1842, the building was done, the main building, which used to be, before the night of April 24th, 2001, the connector between the Rotunda and West Rutland. So these bricks that you can see right here, you see there's a butt joint going right down there. These are new bricks over here. This is 1896, and this is what Dr. Jarman was going to make into the Rotunda when he got here in 1902. But right over here, these bricks, that joining section between West Rutland and the Rotunda, that's the original building. And on the 26th day of April in 1842, they opened that original building. Now, in anticipation that there'd be folks someday nosing around in the ground, the incorporators had a brass plaque executed. Now your eyes are going to be real good to read this. I know it's going to be hard to do it. This brass plaque was mounted to a cornerstone made out of granite schist that was on the northeast corner of the building, which they started in the fall of 1839. And what it says is, the Farmville Female Academy, built by Joint Stock Company, AD 1839. It was found by a number of workmen who were working up underneath what is now the new Rotunda area, what was the old Rotunda before the fire of 2001. And a workman found the stone and thought that someone had smashed a tin can on that stone. It was dark up underneath the Rotunda. And I'm glad it was a conscientious workman. If it had been me, lazy like I am, I probably just would have pushed it aside. But this workman drugged the stone out into the light where it could be seen better, and then he noted it wasn't a tin can smushed onto a flat stone. It was, in fact, the cornerstone of the original building. We took it down to the Virginia Research Center for Archaeology, which at that time was down in Yorktown, and over a period of several months they were able to restore it so that you could read what was on it, and that's what was on it. Farmville Female Academy, built by Joint Stock Company, AD 1839. It was over a hole that had been cut in to that schist granite cornerstone. The hole was roughly about as big as a lunchbox, and in that hole there were 2 letters sealed in envelopes that could no longer be read. There were 3 coins, there was a Masonic emblem, and 2 long, thin sheets of paper that looked like they had lists of something on them, perhaps names. Those are presently housed in the archives of Longwood, and this plaque, which is the original thing that gives Longwood University its basis for existence, is kept on display in the President's office. So, 1839, things started. Bells. Communities of humans have had for a very long time bells. Probably, archaeologically, as long as 7,100 years before the present. The first evidence of a bell in any human society is that old, more than 7,000 years old. This is the Longwood College bell right here. It's pretty big. It weighs 1,017 pounds. I'm going to talk about it in just a minute. But imagine it's not that big. And imagine that you're in China more than 7,000 years ago. Imagine that this bell, which is about 4 feet 2 inches tall, is only about that tall, like about a quart bottle. And imagine that you're going to hold on to the bottom end of it and turn it upside down so that the bell shape is up. And imagine that you're a rice farmer in the Yangtze River Valley. And imagine that you are saying, I will sell you a fair measure of rice, and here's the measure. You can see exactly how much you're going to get. And I won't be able to cheat you because everyone's going to get exactly the same amount of rice. It appears as though bells, which were used as scoops for measuring out rice in Southeast Asia, and when they weren't measuring out rice, they were hung the other way and struck in order to attract attention to the fact that there was someone there very badly wanting to measure out rice for you. That's the way it appears as though bells had their beginning. Well, our bell at Longwood College has an interesting story, and I wonder often, sometimes, how many young ladies have heard that bell ring. It's a wonderful story. 1978, I got here. They said, there used to be a bell here, Jordan, but there isn't anymore. I said, no kidding, that's really interesting. These were men who work in physical plant and who know all of the skeletons that are buried every place around the campus. And literally, this was buried around the campus. You see, and I know that so many of you have been students at Longwood and know this story better than I do. Long, long time ago, that bell used to hang up on a cupola right at the junction of East Rutland and South Rutland. We even know the name of the man who cast the bell. It was cast at the Northville American Bell Foundry plant in Northville, Michigan. His name was Charles von Valkenburg, and this bell was cast from a mold that another bell, its clone, its twin, had been cast from. Usually when a bell mold was made, the first time, it was broken in order to get the cast out and could not be used again. But in this case, for reasons that are not recorded, the mold, it lived through the breaking out of the bell, and it was used a second time. Both of those bells got shipped to Virginia on the railroad. One of them has ended up in our library at Longwood as an archaeological artifact, an item of display. The other one, go to Lexington, Virginia, go down to McAdoo's in Lexington, Virginia, right on Main Street. Do not go in McAdoo's. Just walk up and look at it. Just to your right, right there, is the Lexington Volunteer Fire Department. And hanging right in front of the Lexington Volunteer Fire Department is the twin of our bell. It got off the railroad 3 days before our bell got off the railroad. So we have a twin. 1,017 pounds is how much it weighed, and it was buried in the basement of a building in 1976 by order of the president of Longwood College, Henry I. Willett, who was afraid that with boys coming to Longwood, someone was going to get hurt. Because, you see, as you remember, the bell used to hang way high up on the roof. Now, nowadays, we drag it around every once in a while to use for sort of ceremonial purposes. Here's the bell coming out of the library in its display case, in its hanger there. And this occasion was for the inauguration of President Cormier. The wagon is a Norfolk and Western baggage cart. And do you know where it is? It's right outside that window, chained to the wall, so those people from Hampton Sydney can't steal it like they did one time. It took a lot of pushing and shoving, but from the Norfolk and Western Museum over in Roanoke, we got them to give to us this wagon. And that Christmas color, the green and red, that's the old Norfolk and Western colors for baggage carts. You see, that thing is not pulled by an animal. Well, it is pulled by an animal. It's pulled by a human being. And it's just the right height to move up to a baggage car, and you can move things right off onto the cart, and then it is pulled by human beings. Well, that we imagine is the cart, is like the cart, which one day must have pulled that bell up the hill to go up to the college. You understand? So when we use it on ceremonial occasions, we move it around on a cart that probably was the original thing it rode on. This is President Cormier's inauguration in front of Wheeler. Quasimodo, the bell ringer there. That's actually me. I'm the bell ringer. And take down on the floor there is a list of all 23 of the presidents or principals of the Farmville Female Seminary from 1839 up until her inauguration 4 years ago. And the bell was struck one peal for each of the names on that list. I want you to look at that wagon because the Longwood students all say that's a killer wagon. I don't think you're going to believe the story, but I'm going to tell it to you anyway. The bell was buried in 1976 by order of the president of Longwood College, Henry I. Willett, because he was fearful that although the girls hadn't gotten hurt yet, guys don't have any common sense at all. You see, the girls used to climb out onto the roof of East Rutherford, and they would tie cords or wires around the clapper in the bell, and then they would run them in their bedroom windows, and then in the middle of the night, they would pull on it and ring the damn bell. You understand? Now, that seems like it's just child's play, but of course, in the years when a bell in the night wasn't called a fire bell for nothing, it really raised a lot of trouble. And from time to time in the Farmville paper, there would be letters asking the officials at the college in the 1880s and 1890s to please stop the girls from ringing the bell. The other thing they did, they took rags up and they would tie the rags around the clapper, so that the next morning when the sexton legitimately rang the bell, and the bell was the heartthrob of the college. The bell was the way the college ran its business. Just like monasteries and so many other communities, it was organized by the bell. There are, in the register of 1859, the 20th year of the existence of our school, the Farmville College had a statement about what the bell was used for. It said, the bell rings first thing in the morning for the young ladies to be called to breakfast. It then rings for them to go back to their rooms. It rings for the first class. It rang for morning tea. It rang for study hall. Oh, in those early years, 1839, 1859, they had in the middle of the morning hymns, which were regularly led by the wife of the president, who was called the principal in those days. And it is said that there was this one wife of one principal in the 1850s who, that's a wonderful sound, isn't it? Let us listen to this.
Let us come in.
I never realized how important it was to really stop running. You understand what I mean? And I live up on Second Avenue here, so it's in bed, and I never realized how they stopped running. And she had cymbals that were strapped on the inside of her knees, so she played the piano, cracked the cymbals, and sang all at one time. Most regrettably, this is not recorded visually or in any other way, although in my own mind, I think that my image of it is probably better than it could have ever been in real life. Well, the bell is very important, and Dr. Willett was afraid when the boys came along with that some boy was going to climb out there and being an idiot would fall off the roof and cause all kind of trouble. So he said, the bell comes down, we don't need it anymore, classes go by the watch and things like that. And it was buried in the basement of the building on the Longwood campus. And there it remained until 1981, when word got around that the bell was going to get lost if someone wasn't careful, because it was literally covered up with dirt. You understand? stand at, because they were afraid someone would take it away and sell it for scrap or something like that. So we got permission to get it out. It had 41 coats of paint on it. Red paint, blue paint, green paint, white paint, and 2 coats of gold paint. Where we had it restored, they said that was a real bad thing to happen to the bell, because every one of those coats of paint would subtly change the tone of the bell in ways that von Valkenburg, the bell founder at Northville, Michigan, certainly wouldn't have approved at all. We've used it from time to time at Founders Day. One time I remember we had it in the old dining hall, and at the end of the ceremony, people were invited to come up and, using a leather mallet, strike the bell. And a woman came up. She was a student at the college in the 1920s, and she rang the bell and she started crying. And she said, it's just something, I mean, I walk around and I know this is where I used to walk, and these are the walls that I used to be on the other side of, but just hearing that sound brings back so much more than simply looking. Do you understand what I mean? Hearing a sound out of the past. And that's something, I guess, that we don't have the chance to do very often. So, our community is rich for a number of ways, and I think that doggone bell enriches us a great deal. Now, they were doing work on the rotunda before it burned down, the night of April 24th, 25th, 2001, and a part of that work involved East Ruffner and North Ruffner and, doing all sorts of things to make the building look nice when it was going to be renovated. And here we have Alan Cook, the director of construction, and he's pointing to a hole in the wall. And that hole in the wall is where the chain came out of that went up through the wall onto the roof to ring the bell. And there was a wooden box there. I can remember seeing the wooden box every day. That's where I would go to get mail. And it had a lock on it. And the sexton would have the key, unlock the box, take the chain out, ring the bell, put the chain back in, and lock the box up again. You understand what I mean? This was the way to keep unauthorized persons from ringing it. And right there is where it was. And we took the box down to save. It was going to be put back up on the same spot as an archaeological artifact. And of course, the same spot is now gone, although a new spot like it will appear at some time. That's where the bell came into. This is the old station that used to be right down there, right down at the end. Isn't that Bob where you took me, right down there at the end of the street?
Correct,
there?
yes, sir.
Yeah, over to the left a little bit is where it sat. How long ago did you tear it down? 7, 8 years, something like that?
Probably not even, maybe 5.
About 5 years ago? Yeah, it was an old tumble-down building. It had this big sign up. It said, dangerous, condemned, stay out, things like that. Went down there one time because there's a story about when the bell was transported up onto campus from down here on the railroad. Now, I don't know if this story is true or not. I guess it falls under the general label, of folk tale, folklore, myth, legend, and things like that. But the story is that the bell came in on the train, and the administration was dilly-dallying around and couldn't get their act together to get someone down here to get the bell. And so the girls of the school very badly wanted their bell up on campus. So it is said that they came down and borrowed a baggage cart and had permission to do it. And they were going to push the bell up onto campus. That's the story. Okay, here we are out on High Street now. This is the rotunda before it was the rotunda. This is before 1902 when Dr. Jarman got here. This picture is probably about 1891 or 1892, I was told by the archivist of Longwood. This is High Street that we're looking at right here. Directly behind the photographer is the Confederate monument. You guys are all there. October 11th, 1900, the day the Confederate monument was dedicated. Well, the Confederate monument isn't behind us now, because this is probably about 10 years before that or so. This is High Street right here. Let's see, the Methodist Church is right here, and the Episcopal Church is right over there, and we're looking at what used to always front the main building, which became the rotunda, that white pale picket fence. And here are some ladies of the school standing at the front entrance. And here's dirt. And see those things right there? They look like candy bars. Those are stepping stones. The council of the town of Farmville gave permission to the school to put stepping stones across High Street in 1884. Oh boy, times were tough in 1884. The college almost went out of business. And the town did a great, remember the financial panic of 1873, just about bankrupt the school. And for the next 10 years, no one knew whether the thing was going to survive or not. By 1884, the Commonwealth had stepped in and we looked like we were safe. And the town had done a lot, like the town does, free water, free sewage and stuff like that, in order to get development going. So the town said, you can put stepping stones across the street. That was necessary because these young ladies' garments would hang down, brush the ground. Summertime, dust all over your skirts. Wintertime, mud all over your skirts. So you step from one stepping stone to another. They were laid long way so that wagons and other wheeled vehicles going up and down High Street would be able to pass their wheels right through the grooves there in the stepping stones. And the story is that the young ladies, not accustomed to pushing a bell that weighed 1,017 pounds on top of a very tall baggage cart that was probably not very stable, it is said that the wheel of the baggage cart hit one of the stepping stones, and the bell, heavy and great as it was, slipped off the baggage cart and crushed a co-ed to death. Or, in some versions of the story, injured her very badly. Well, at any rate, they say that in the olden days, I was never here then, in the olden days, they say that every once in a while, when the sexton would ring the bell, the sexton was real good at ringing it rhythmically so that 4 strokes, would sound gong, gong, they'd be perfectly spaced. Every once in a while, they say he screwed up and he would miss a gong, or 2 of them came too close together or something, and what all the girls on High Street said was that was a remembrance of the body of that poor little co-ed that got trapped between that 1,017-pound bell and the ground, fell over. It's interesting about a patron saint at Longwood, Joan of Arc. She became our patron in 1914. She became Saint Joan in 1920. And a big bell was made in honor of her becoming a saint. It was called Jeanne d'Arc. The bell was named Joan of Arc. It wasn't at Longwood. I bet they'd like to have gotten their hands on it. It was in a cathedral in Paris. And it's sort of interesting. Longwood has had a lot of trouble with fires. The fire we had in 2001 wasn't the first time. I know that many of you were there in 1949. What was the date? March 4th, 1949? That was a big White House fire, wasn't it? And then there was the fire that I saw all of you at in 1923. That was the fire that happened at Halloween. 1923, they had this big fire. It was called what was the name of that fire in 23?
I think we just called it the South
Wing Fire.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Bob. The South Wing Fire. That was 2 days before Thanksgiving, something like that. And all of the girls were sent home, just like happened in our Great Fire of 2001. And 2 weeks later, they got a call to come back to Farmville to continue their intellectual labors. And do you know what those students did, those girls? They voted not to take Christmas vacation that year in 1923, but to remain on campus in Farmville and continue their studies because it was important for them to do that. They had 1 hour off Christmas morning for a celebration, and that was all the Christmas holidays in 1923. Times do change. Well, at any rate, it's interesting, the association of our community of scholars with fire and so on. The bell Jeanne d'Arc, it weighed 10 tons, and they left it sitting on the ground for a year in 1922, so people could come up and touch it and so on, because once they raised it into the belfry in the cathedral, no one would ever see it anymore. Do you understand what I mean? That's kind of a shame. When you hear the bell ringing in Lancaster building now, the administration building, which used to be the old library, there is actually a bell up there that's ringing, but you can't see it, and it doesn't move. The bell is nailed to the floor, as it were, and it's struck with metal hammers. So it sounds real good. It sounds just like a romantic bell going back and forth in an English village church, but it's all mechanical and so on. Bells generally do their work without being able to be seen. So Jeanne d'Arc, the great bell in France, named for Saint Joan of Arc, was raised up into the belfry after a year on the ground, and it hung there for 20 years, from 1922 to 1942, and a German bomb accidentally, apparently, fell on the belfry during an air raid in the town in France, and caused the belfry to catch on fire. The bell got real hot, it fell to the ground and broke into about 1 million pieces. So, poor St. Joan, her bell, only lived for 2 decades. Well, let's see what else we got besides bells. We got the Civil War. Joe, can you give us an idea of what it looked like out there at High Bridge on April 6, 1865? I mean this in all seriousness. Can you give us a description?
The Union troops were pursuing the Confederates,
And this was April 6, 1865.
and Confederate troops managed to get across the bridge, and they supposedly set fire to the bridge behind them. They had a cross up in their communications, and the fires were late getting started. So even though they started, the Union troops were were able to put them out using the water in the barrels that were on the bridge. And the wagon train down below was of green timbers, and they were able to extinguish the fires of the wagon.
And that all happened the afternoon and evening of April 6, 1865? I mean, honestly, there's a question mark after that.
Now, I
Yeah.
have a question mark also on the dates.
Okay, so maybe it happened April 6th. That would have been a Thursday, isn't that right? Thursday, April 6th, 1865.
I think, Jordan, the fire on the bridge
Was the
happened that night. The wagon
So
bridge
it
was
was
fired
April 7th.
in the daylight, break of dawn of April 7th.
And that would have been a Friday.
Yeah.
Saturday.
Friday.
Friday, April
Friday.
7th, 1865 was a Friday. Because the next Friday was the 14th of April, and that was Good Friday. Yeah, that's right. So April 7th. I'm trying to put this in mind because there is a surviving letter from a student at the college. Her name was Mary Lynn Harrison, and the letter was eventually published years after she wrote it. Mary Lynn Harrison from Chesapeake. She wrote the letter in 1865, and she says that it was Friday morning, April 6th, but it seemed to me as though it would be Friday morning, April 7th. The letter was published in Harper's Magazine in 1909, so that was, what, about 45 years after she wrote the letter. And she said that we could hear coming from the distance, from that place where we had spent so many pleasant afternoons, out at High Bridge, the sound of musketry. And this made us all very frightened. I'm paraphrasing the letter roughly. And she said that night none of us were able to sleep. And she said in the middle of the night, many of us went up onto the roof of the main building and stood at a parapet where soon we were able to see emerging from the dark as though ghosts, in ragtag uniforms scarcely deserving the name of uniform, the elements of our brave brothers and fathers, the Confederate Army. And they came through Farmville. Let's see, they would have been coming from Sailor's Creek at that time. Is that right? They were coming from Sailor's Creek. Right on the third floor of the rotunda before it burned down, April 24, 2001. And the men who were doing the renovation said, look here, Jordan, look at those bricks right there, and look at these bricks right here. These bricks are all weathered, both on the inside and outside. There was a railing up here at one time or another, and someplace long after that railing was deemed to be no longer useful, they put up the rest of this wall. I'd like to believe that Mary Lynn Harrison's little knees were leaning up against that on April 6th, April 7th, 1865. But of course, that's one of the kinds of things, you know, that archaeologists, though they want to believe, normally have a very hard time proving. I wish I could have been here that night. Let's see, it would have been up at 304 Beach Street, right? R.E. Lee was up there that evening, slept, well, 4 or 5 hours, then went over across and paid his respects to the widow Thornton, whose husband had been on the staff and killed, as I recall, in 1862. This picture was taken sometime, probably the third week of April, 1865. And that would have been just a couple of weeks after he came right through Farmville. And I guess, let's see, he supervised the unloading of rations off a couple of cars on the railroad. So he was, I guess, standing right where we are now. He was standing here. The great marble man, R.E. Lee. He's one of my favorites, General George Armstrong Custer, Union cavalry officer. Graduated last in his class at West Point, the military academy, was said to have been extremely glad to have graduated at all. Ran immediately from West Point down to New York, had his golden hair. You know what the Sioux Indians called him? Pohonka, the golden-haired one. They said you could smell him coming a mile away. He put perfume all over his hair. Ran down to New York upon becoming a second lieutenant, got his picture taken and so on. And he came through Farmville that night too, with George Armstrong Custer. Let's see. Not in Farmville that night, but I guess he wished he could have been. Joseph Eggleston Johnston out there at Longwood House. My favorite, Philip K. Sheridan, 5 feet 5 inches tall, the Union commander of cavalry. Abraham Lincoln is said to have observed, I always thought a cavalry commander should be at least as tall as his horse. Sheridan's horse is 7 feet 5 inches tall. In the case of Sheridan, 5 feet 5 inches will do quite fine. Thank you. Apparently, though, he was a diminutive man in stature, he must have been a great cavalry officer. Still, every once in a while, on the tree roots, out in front of the rotunda and in front of Lancaster, when you get some pitching and freezing and thawing and turbation in the springtime, roots will bring up evidence of the military passage that occurred in Farmville in the form of mini balls and canister shot and buttons and things like that. I guess that's what folks in Farmville must have been really scared of that first week in April. They must have heard what was going on in Richmond, you know, with the fires and so on. And then there was the darn thing, the dictator, which they had down at Petersburg, fired a 13-inch projectile. Story is they could only fire it about 2 times in an afternoon because the pot got so hot that they couldn't reload the thing right away. And rumor was going around town they were going to bring this thing on the railroad right up here to Farmville. And boy, they would have been able to level the town with it. So I guess people in Farmville were really pretty scared. Who was the lady that buried the silver right out here in the railroad cut?
Oh.
I'd love to go out there and look for that stuff. You guys don't know about this? Yeah, she got all the silver together. She carried it in her apron. Her silver and some neighbors went down to the railroad cut. You remember, Bob?
Yes.
And buried it in the raw dirt bank along the railroad cut. And damned if she didn't forget where she buried it. You know, it would have been scary in the middle of the night. You're out there in the dark, you're afraid you're going to die, so you bury the stuff, and you think, I'll remember it's right here by this rock. Well, she didn't die, Farmville didn't get destroyed, and she went back to find the silver, and she can't find it. And it's still out there along the railroad cut someplace. Can you remember her name?
I do not,
Yeah.
but I know the
But
story.
You know the story, yeah. Listen, if you're not busy tonight, pick up. No, probably Norfolk and Southern wouldn't like it. Well, they did a real bad dirty down there at their troops did, down at the college. There was this smart aleck guy named Major Anderson, a Union Army officer, who at about midnight on April 9, 1865, caused all of the college students and their teachers to line up in front of the main building. And he read them the order of surrender, which was 1 paragraph long, kind of bureaucratic statement, and then he added his own personal message at the end of reading the order of surrender. He said, this smart aleck Yankee, now you are without an army and you are without a country. But what is more important to you, I suppose, you are without a school. What a smart aleck thing to say. Now, Mary Lynn Harrison said the following, quote, each day after that day, the meals became scanter and poorer in quality until we were told that the supplies of the storeroom would be exhausted in 1 more day. Word came that the last wagon train of the hated Union Army would move from Burkeville towards Richmond in 1 afternoon, and that those who wished to reach Richmond should get themselves to the railroad quickly. The principal favored the scheme, and in a few minutes, the 26 girls who remained, there were 80 students here at the college in 1865. I don't know what happened to 80 minus 26 by the night of April the 9th, but there were 26 students remaining on April 9th. The remaining 26 girls on their way to the wagons. Dismounted Confederate cannons were the seats for us. There not even being straw in these rough wagons. And we had eaten nothing since our scanty breakfast that morning, and had with us, given as a gift, only 2 small rolls of sour bread. The coaches were old and rickety and threatened each moment to collapse. The coach I rode in was filled with Union officers, resplendent in their epaulets and stars and gold braid. And outside the windows of the car, I could see, gypsy-like fashion, the ragtag remnants of the Confederate Army moving along the country lanes. Some of the officers attempted to make conversation with us, but we were too proud and too sore-hearted to respond. Must have been very sad. I'd like to believe he stood on that piece of slate, but I don't think he did. But a lot of you did. That's the piece of slate right there that was always in front of the rotunda. You see how it's all scooped out there. Robert, do you remember the name of the man who put the slate shingles on the Episcopal Church in 1869?
I remember.
Lightfoot was his name, Lightfoot, from up at Remo. And there's some thought that maybe he was the guy who put this sillstone down there. You know, that thing survived the fire of April 2001. The contractor had covered it up with sand to a depth of about 3 feet, then built a crib over top of the sand, and there was a ramp where little backhoes and things were going in and out of the front doors of the rotunda, right over the sillstone. Do you understand what I mean? The night of the fire, everything fell right down on that crib, but the sillstone was intact when it was later excavated, but it was baked by the intense heat. And most regrettably now, it is fragmented. In other words, it's coming apart, if you understand what I mean. So there's no way that it can be returned, as the thought was, to once again serve as the cradle for the footsteps of hundreds of thousands of Longwood girls and not boys. because it just won't stand it. But it's going to be displayed as an archaeological artifact. You know something, when you stop to think about it, it really is remarkable. Think of all of the, in the olden days, school teachers, female school teachers, whose tread marked that cradle in the sillstone there. And think of all the places they went to, just in Virginia alone, and think of the hundreds of thousands of students that they molded and touched. I mean, it wouldn't be like, you know, in the 1890s or 1900s like it is today, where students have movies to watch and television and letters to write. I mean, your teacher, I'm guessing, would have been a very, very important person to you. And how many students in Virginia were taught by Longwood girls of one name or another, as we underwent all of our name changes from 1839 up to 2 years ago? And so many of them stood, walked, tread, sat, I suppose, on that piece of slate right there. Our Commonwealth would not be the same if it wasn't for Farmville and the community of young women who came to this place 165 years ago and are still at this place 165 years later. Which brings me to Lucy Lancaster. I used to walk down there to the gift shop. Remember the Landscott gift shop right across from Drummond Auditorium? And Lucy Lancaster told me this story. She said, the Confederate monument is down there, and she said, I remember that sometimes when you went down and you looked at the Confederate monument, it would make a shadow at nighttime. And she said the shadow would normally be on the wall of the East Ruffner building, and the shadow, sometimes it seemed like it was on the bricks, and sometimes it's up here on this white molding. She said when it was up on the molding, you could see it real well. And she said, what they always told me, Dr. Jordan, was that as long as you could see the shadow of the Confederate trooper, everything was okay in Farmville, because the trooper kept an eye on us and things were going to be, you were safe. But Lucy Lancaster said every once in a while, you can't see the shadow of the trooper on the college building. And when that happens, something bad is going to happen that night in Farmville. There's going to be a terrible thing occur. Someone will die, or there'll be a terrible fire or theft or something, because the trooper is clearly not on duty. Okay, I want you to look at this building right here. I want you to look up here and imagine where that statue's shadow is going to be. See how the statue is standing there? See? Okay, we'll get a frontal view here of the statue. Oops, I'm sorry. We're now getting a frontal view of that building at about 2 a.m. on April 25th, 2001. See, the fire was reported, according to the State Fire Marshal's record, at 9:13 p.m., April 24th. By 2 a.m. the next morning, so the fire's now been burning about 5 hours, East Ruffner is fully involved. And do you see that right there? Okay, look at the Confederate statue. Okay, there's the Confederate statue. You see how the Confederate statue has a hat on and the haversack and the rifle and so on? Okay, I want you to look again at what's on the roof of East Ruffner. Isn't that something? I mean, it looks like the Confederate statue. There's the hat. It even looks like there's smoke coming out of the gun. I didn't take this picture. One of my students, Phil Jones is his name, took this picture and didn't know what he had taken a picture of at that time. He was taking pictures of the fire. Do you understand? It was only weeks later that he looked at his pictures and saw what he had. And that's when I became aware of this, and I just think it's wonderful. And I wish Lucy Lancaster was still alive so she could see it too. It looks like the Confederate statue to me. It'll be interesting to see when East Ruffner gets completed in another year. It's supposed to be done in May of 2005 if the shadow of the Confederate statue gets up there again. I hope it does. But see, that's the way it looked the day in 1914 when Joan of Arc came to the college. But see, 1914, World War I was beginning in Europe. We weren't in it yet in the United States. It was going to be a couple more years before we got in it. And for reasons that are lost in the mists of time, the college decided to acquire a statue of Joan of Arc, who was not yet St. Joan. And they acquired it, and in 1914, it was delivered and put into the parlor of the Rotunda, where it sat for years and years and years and years. That statue, remember, is the one that we call Joni on the Stony. It was sculpted by a French sculptor in 1870. His name was André Michel Chapeau, and he called it Joan listening to the voices. She was listening to her archangels, Margaret and Michael. But the girls at Longwood said that she was just sitting on a stone, so they called it Joni on the Stony. The rumor was, when I came to Longwood in 1978, that if you went into the rotunda late at night and you were sincere in your heart, you weren't joking around or something like that, if your heart was strong in believing, that you could hear her. Sometimes they say she hummed, and sometimes they say it sounded like she whistled. It seems strange that Joan of Arc would whistle, but that's what the stories were. Now, this would never happen if there was more than a single person there. And so there wasn't any way that people could corroborate each other. Sometimes she hummed and sometimes she whistled. She hardly ever said any words. See what I mean? And they said that the sound wouldn't sound like it was coming out of the statue. It sounded like it was all around you. It was everywhere in the parlor, they said. Well, there may be an explanation for that. Okay, here we are outside now. Here's the Methodist Church. We're standing about where the colonnade is now. Colonnade, can you picture where that is? And the French building is just down to the right. This building still stands right beside the Methodist Church there, remember? And this huge Chinese elm tree right here, that's the one that died about 10 years ago. We counted the annual growth rings on that one when it died about 10 years ago, and it was planted apparently in 1837. We had a forester come and date the tree, and probably they planted it right in front of the church that was built the year before. So here we've got some girls, and they're out in the front lawn, and we're looking at them getting a picture taken, and High Street is right behind them. This has something to do with Joan of Arc humming. Okay, now, we're at the same place, a different year. We're looking a little bit more to the left. There's a Methodist church right there. And here's a Confederate monument right here. And right behind the Confederate monument, where Bicentennial Park is, there are those two frame houses that all of you can remember. I never saw them. They had been torn down before I got to Farmville in 1978. But you all remember, I am told, that there were those two big frame houses back there. Okay, this all has something to do with Joan humming in the rotunda. When I got here, Bicentennial Park wasn't there, and you can still see the remains of parts of the foundations of those two frame houses, which were owned by the college and were used for faculty and other people to live in on a sort of temporary, transitory basis. And you could see a couple of holes in the ground where you could go down a little ways into, but physical plant had very carefully filled those holes up with riprap and dirt and so on, because otherwise it was an attractive nuisance and people could get hurt in those holes. Okay, here we are in the rotunda as the renovation work is going on before the Great Fire of April 2001. And the floor of the rotunda is gone, Joan of Arc is gone, but look, the walls are still there, and they got these pillars supported on posts and so on, and they got this little baby backhoe ditch witch in there, and they're digging around, they're doing stabilizing work on the foundation. And these workmen down there, they said, you can't believe what was under here, it's remarkable. Underneath, see, you're standing about right where Joan of Arc was now. You stood there 1,000 times. Underneath you, there were a series of rooms. Some of them had been filled up with dirt that had been brought in by tunnels underneath, but some of the rooms weren't filled up with dirt, they were still hollow. Now, Bob Flippin in 1902, Bob Flippin in 2002, when he reprinted the 100-year-ago page of the Farmville Herald News, he had an article about General Benjamin Matthews Cox, who was an administrator at the college, and General Cox was commenting on the fact that beneath the main building, they now had the new electrical generating plant installed. And these workmen said that that's what they thought they were dealing with down here. There were a number of blind rooms that were never finished off. There was coke and coke like you make for a fire, for a hot fire. There was evidence of coal. There was charred clay. And there were these tunnels that ran under 4 different directions, going up and down the hallways, back towards the dining hall, and right out under the sidewalk, under the front lawn of the rotunda. General Cox said they had cut their electrical bill from something like $27 a month to $2 a month because they were now generating their own electricity. Of course, the electricity only worked from 6 a.m. until 8 p.m. That's the only time there was electricity at the college. And the statement was, the girls didn't mind, for 8 p.m. was bedtime anyway. Can you believe that? I have students in my 8 a.m. class tomorrow morning who I don't think got to bed, well, until they come to class. Then they go to bed. When they get to my class, they go to sleep right then. But in those days, 100 years ago, the girls didn't mind the lights going off at 8 p.m. because it was bedtime anyway. Okay, what these workmen told me was, you got all kind of wind moving around down here, Jordan. Many of these tunnels have openings that go up through the ground, and these tunnels would make all kinds of noise. It was like some kind of musical instrument. And given the barometric pressure outside and movement of wind and changes in temperature and so on based on inside as opposed to outside, you can expect these tunnels to be singing. I guess that's where all of those stories come from about if you're really brave, you could go underneath the rotunda, they told me, and you could crawl on your hands and knees under High Street, and you could hear the cars going over your head. Did any of you ladies ever do that? I was afraid to. I was shown where it was you could crawl in under the rotunda, and it was pointed to me which little black opening you went into, and I was afraid to do it. I was told that you could crawl under High Street and come out over in Bicentennial Park. So those stories about Joan of Arc singing and so on, they really have some sort of basis. Oh, the walls in the rotunda were just honeycomb with openings. The workmen who were doing the renovation said that, well, for example, in this shot right here, if you measure the distance between these two faculty offices right there, in the hallway and outside on the little roof here, you get a certain number of feet in inches. But inside, the wall is about 3 feet thicker than it needs to be. Do you understand what I mean? In other words, there's a 3-foot thick wall between those two offices. Well, that would be big enough that you could stack up 3 or 4 corpses in there, I suppose, which of course is what girls often thought in the olden days. But the workmen who were doing the work said that a lot of these channels that were built into the walls were built originally to be chimneys. And for one reason or another, they were never used as chimneys. So they were filling them all up with concrete block, cut to just the right size, because they said otherwise you were going to hear whistling sounds and vibration in the walls. So I'll tell you, all of the girls who, you know, were scared out of their bejeebers because Joan was talking to them, we shouldn't have laughed at them. Because if it wasn't Joan talking to them, it was the building talking to them. Longwood House. Out back, they had the dell, you know, down there, where they used to have May Day ceremonies and graduation and things like that down there in the dell. And then you have all walked through the woods out back, and you come back there to the old cabin. And then behind the old cabin, there's a cemetery. It's right on the hillside behind the old cabin. Now, the cemetery is not so visible as Longwood House or the old cabin, because, of course, the graves, and I think there are 33. We've counted a number of different times, and I think there are 33 graves. They appear to have been exhumed. Here you can see a grave shaft, and a grave shaft, and a grave shaft right there. Periwinkle, Vinca minor, wolfbane, dogbane, that's what they all call it. You know what? They brought that over from Old England to Virginia. It's a camp follower weed. It's an evergreen. It stays green all year round. It loves to grow on disturbed soil. It prefers dogbane, wolfbane, periwinkle to grow on disturbed soil. And in Old England, they used it on graves all the time. Once it's planted, it doesn't spread laterally very far at all. And it stays right where you put it, and it gets thicker and thicker in that spot. So Aunt Emma dies, you bury Aunt Emma, you cover up her grave, disturbed soil, with Vinca minor, periwinkle, dogbane, wolfbane, and you serve a number of very valuable functions. Number one, you have hidden the raw dirt and salved your memory of the grave being out there. Number two, it looks pretty. It stays green all year round. And they don't call it wolfbane for nothing. Bane like in to stay away from something. For many kinds of rooting, burrowing animals do not like to dig in periwinkle because on the undersides of leaves for much of the year there's a white effusion that appears on the little stems on the undersides of leaves that animals don't like to get on their fur. It tastes bad. And so it keeps rooting animals away from graves. In England, they used it for all of these purposes. In England, it got brought by the Romans, who planted it all around their camps as a way to keep down dust and keep mud from being underfoot all the time. And it got to Virginia, and it got out. I'll tell you, when you're walking in the woods and you see a patch of periwinkle, start looking around, because the chances are pretty good you're in an abandoned cemetery. Now, this cemetery is supposed to have had Scots and Venables and Bakers and other folks buried in it, but it doesn't look like any of them are buried in it now, because the graves appear to have been exhumed, and all the markers are gone. Richard McClintock, they say that some of those markers are at Hampton Sydney College. Could you speak to that point, sir? Do you have the markers from our cemetery? That's what I'm asking you, Richard.
I don't know, Willie Thompson probably can take it.
Okay, if you have them, we'd like them back. You forgot one. You forgot a big ledger. It wasn't a monument standing up on edge like that, a tombstone. It was a ledger down flat. And there it is. It's the only one surviving. It was on a brick foundation, and it's Eliza C. She died, March 24th. I was thinking March 14th. Eliza C. Scott. Her mother lived in Longwood House. Letters describe Eliza as being an unusual child. I don't know exactly what that meant, but apparently she never married. She stayed home for the moment of her life. Died on March 24th, 1850, aged 53 years. What saith the happy dead? She bids me bear my load. With patient steps proceed and follow her to God. So she must not have had a very happy life with an epitaph, a happy death. She bids us to bear our load, and with patient steps like she has, follow her to God. How happens to be misstealing that one, I don't know. We got some problems not only with fires, but also with cemeteries down there with the girls on High Street. Now, this is a list of lots in the Josiah Chambers survey. And it's real hard, you can't read it, I understand. But it's the name of the person who owned the lot, the number of the lot, and how much the lot was sold for. Okay, take my word for it, that lot number 123, right here, was not sold for anything in 1839 to anyone. And the reason it wasn't sold to the 7 incorporators of the Farmville Female Seminary is stated over here. Not sold being the family burying ground. So someplace in the world, there's a lot number 123, that's a family burying ground that the incorporators of Longwood University couldn't buy. Here's where it is. Okay, this is a plat. Here is High Street, right here. This is where the Confederate monument is, right here. This is where Lancaster building is, the administration building of Longwood University, right here. The Episcopal Church is here. Lucy Lancaster's gift shop is right up here. Okay, now we go down one block. Here we are on Pine Street. Here's where the Heiner building sits. The elementary school, Farmville Elementary School, the Heiner building. And right across Pine Street is lot number 123, and it says graveyard not sold. It's on Pine Street. It's right behind the Lancaster building, and in fact, it's right underneath North Cunningham Dormitory. And as far as anyone knows, it was never sold to anyone. It's always been sacrosanct soil, and presumably there are people in lot number 123. Okay, here we are in the area. Here's High Street right here. Here's the Rotunda, there's the Methodist Church. Here's the Lancaster building. So we're going up Pine Street, and right under this part of North Cunningham Dormitory is lot 123. Now, it used to have a bench. See, this is the corner. Here's the wall of the presidents, where they have all the names of the presidents. There are dead people kicking the president's bricks from underneath that bank. I'm just sure of it. But at any rate, I took a picture of my daughter, Katie, one day, sitting on that bench, and it's really spooky. Look at the way the light, is. In North Cunningham, there are these stories. First floor, North Cunningham, there's supposed to be a man. He wears a wool shirt, and you wake up in the middle of the night, and he never says anything to you, and he never touches you or anything. He's just there, and it looks like he's sitting on the floor. But some girls say that it looks like he's sticking up through the floor. And as soon as you see him, he just kind of disappears away. I believe the stories. The damn building sits on a cemetery. It makes sense that there would be people who would sit up every once in a while and look around to see what's going on. This is slightly corroborated by a story in South Cunningham. In January of the year 2000, 3 freshman students living on the top floor of South Cunningham, that's not underneath the cemetery, but it's close to it. This student here, Asia Brooks, she said that all of a sudden their lights started going off and on, like the power was going to go off. And they, in their room, were afraid that the power was going off in town and it was going to be bad. So they went out in the hallway and they found out no one else's lights were going off and on. It was just in their room. So they thought, oh my goodness, there's something wrong with the wiring in our room. So they went back in the room, and their computer printer started turning itself off and on and printing out sheets of paper. And they thought there was some terrible malfunction, we better notify, our RA right away. So they went down the hall and notified their RA, Erica Scott, and she said, the same thing is happening in my room. She said, my television set is going off and on and off and on, and I can't stop it. I'm pressing the button to turn it off, and it won't stop. It won't go off. It just keeps going off and on its own. Asia Brooks went back to her room, and she had left a can of orange soda on her dresser. And the can of orange soda was now sitting inside a drawer of her dresser that had been pulled open. So they got all spooky and everything, and they took that picture that you just saw. And she swears on the honor code that no one monkeyed around with this picture, that everything that I'm telling you, she swears to me is true. She said that a friend of hers in visual arts took the image and enhanced it by contrasting the colors and doing all those kinds of things that you guys know how to do on computers, and made a kind of light thing appear over here in front of the dresser, and then using a stylus outlined what looked in that picture a little bit like a figure that was sitting on the dresser. Now, I don't know if you believe this or not, and I don't know if I do either, but I'll tell you, that Cunningham building, there's one room, 333 Main Cunningham, the room that has the red line that goes around 3 of the walls. And they say they paint that room, and after a couple of months, the red line shows through the paint again. You can imagine what they think that red line is. The girls on High Street, I guess like human beings everywhere for 5.25 million years, were not only interested in the day-to-day business of life, they were also interested in the day-to-day business of things not of life, things of death and the hereafter and so on. Let's see, we've been here a long time. I'm going to skip over some things because there's one guy I really want to talk about, and he scares the daylights out of me, and if I don't talk about him, I'll be in big trouble. So I'm going to skip over some stuff because it's getting late, but I want to talk about Dr. Thaxton, W.H. Thaxton. He's the guy who scares me. Let's see, this is the French building at Longwood, right across from the Wyandotte. And as you all know, Dr. W.H. Thaxton of Farmville, Virginia, the first scientifically trained dentist in a program dedicated to dentistry, practice in his home, that the remains of which sit underneath the front of the French building. Let's see, he went to the Baltimore College of Physicians and Surgeons in 1841, and in 1842 was pronounced dentist. W.H. Thaxton returned to Farmville, where he practiced dentistry from 1842 until he died in 1899. He practiced right up until the very end. He was also mayor of Farmville and a bunch of other things too. You know where he is now? He's safe. He's down in Westview Cemetery under a huge obelisk. The Thaxton family is all down there. The reason I'm afraid of Dr. Thaxton is I've always been afraid of dentists. I must have been traumatized when I was very young or something. But then when I came to Farmville and realized the first dentist in the whole wide world who was really a dentist and not a horse doctor or something like that, practiced right on High Street, almost where I live. So when they began doing some work, there are these stories about the French building, about bad things that happened to girls in the French building and so on. Dr. Thaxton seems to be at work. This is the attic of the French building. Now, the French building was built in 1922. Dr. Thaxton died in 1899, so he never saw the French building. This is a work of physical plan. Johnny Clements. And up in the attic of the French building, inside the attic, there was a secondary structure that had been built. And you can see the frame for it right here. It's got different flooring outside, and it looks like it wouldn't have had any windows in it. And you can only imagine, why someone built a little chamber in the attic of a building. There are all sorts of stories that the girls in the French building tell about what went on up there. I'll tell you something else. Up on the roof of the French building, last fall, they were replacing some terracotta tile that is believed to have been the original drainage material on the roof of the French building, which was built in 1922. And wedged in the crack between 2 terracotta tiles, staring at the sky since about 1922 when it was put there, there was an Indian head penny. Now, it's really hard to read the date. Can you ladies read the date on that Indian head penny? 1893. So apparently there was a workman, I guess he was a workman in 1922, who was up on top of the French building putting in the drainage. And out of his pocket, there would have fallen a penny that was then 1921 or 22, about 30 years old, and got wedged in there and has been observing Farmville, Virginia, on the roof of the French building for nearly 80 years now. I just think it's wonderful. One of your colleagues took this picture. Dennis Serkin is the guy who took this picture of the penny. So at any rate, that French building has got, a lot of things that go on in it, and it's got this darn dentist office up underneath it. Okay, here's Dr. Thaxton's house right here. This is before the French building was built. We're in the backyard. This is a building that stood right where the Winoke Hotel is right now. That's where this building stands. And here's some girls that call it. So this is Dr. Thaxton's home and office. They did some work on the French building in 1985. And I was walking down the street one day, and they were out there. This puts fear into students when they see, my God, he's got 2 carousels. Isn't he ever going to shut up? We're not going to go so I'm going to shut up for a second. See, it's Christmas time in 1985. Bob Flippin is gone. I'm lonesome. I don't know what to do. And there are these people who are cutting down the hillside in front of the French building. It was all overgrown with brush and everything. They're going to put up a pretty sign. The sign was going to say Longwood College. And so, not lacking anything else to do, I kind of hung around and watched them. And these are the nicest guys in the world. Thomas Jefferson said, surely God has at his breast a special place for those, like farmers and foresters, who work in the earth. And I include, with Thomas Jefferson's farmers and foresters, archaeologists and people who dig footings for putting in signs. These were nice guys. In many ways, they were better than my own students in finding things, and the stuff they found in that hillside was just remarkable. All kinds of animal bones, cut in ways that do not seem to be related to butchering of animal bones for the purpose of consuming. And we sent these away to 2 people who specialize in the history of dentistry at MCV, VCU, and they said, it looks as though the good doctor, Dr. Thaxton, must have been experimenting with making his own dental appliances and so on by mixing up matrix made out of bones of one sort or another. So we were finding some of this stuff. There's Dr. Thaxton himself. Very sleepy looking man. They say that he had this white dog. That's where he is now. Down in Washington. Otherwise I wouldn't talk about him. They said that he had this white dog. I got a picture of the fence. Yeah, there you go. And that, see, Dr. Thaxton's house is down here. Here's what's going to be the rotunda. Here's West Bruckner. We're heading up High Street to my house. Now, that every evening he walked along, there's that picket fence. It's always been there in front of the college. And he had this little dog. It was a white dog. Surely he must have died every once in a while, been replaced by another white dog. But that one time, the little dog stuck his head between 2 of the pails in the picket fence, and the good doctor jerked the leash and snapped the little fellow's head off. And so he must have been a real mean man. In the French building, they have a number of fireplaces that are really spooky, but also make sounds that everyone says is the sound of his old dental drills whirling and so on. As you and I now know, those old buildings have all kinds of sounds they can make. Okay, we don't have time to look at Stanley Park. That was a scary place too in 1875. One time your president, Bob Flippin, climbed up onto the roof of Stanley Park and was looking at those lightning rods up on the roof of Stanley Park. It was someplace. So there are a couple of stories about Stanley Park and what went on up there, but we don't have time to talk about them. And Dr. Jarman, there he was, the great one, president of the college for 42 years, put his mark on it, as few other people have ever put their marks on the college. And you all know that he still sits in Jarman Auditorium. Now, he never saw Jarman Auditorium. He died in 1948, and Jarman Auditorium was built in 1950 and named for him. So he never actually sat in Jarman. But all the people who are theater arts majors, they leave a rose on the second seat in the second row of the right-hand balcony at every performance. And that's Dr. Jarman's seat, they say. And if they don't leave the rose there, bad things happen. The curtains will open and close, and lights will go on, and things like that. So Dr. Jarman is still alive on campus. And then there's Francis Butler Simpkins, who is said to have taken his papers down to the cemetery and graded papers sitting around on tombstones. I never knew either Dr. Jarman or Dr. Simpkins. Joni saw a lot of excitement. As soon as she got there in 1914, the young ladies made up a ritual, a ceremony, which they call the stampede. Now, those of you who have engaged in it, please check my details on this and correct me. As I understand the stampede, what you did was, in the morning, you stole either butter or maple syrup from the dining hall. And then that evening, you got yourself organized with a bunch of other girls, and you would run down the second floor, East Ruffner to West Ruffner, run around the well eye. This is called a well eye in architectural terms, beating on these balusters right here. Went the whole way down to West Ruffner, beating on the walls, stampede, a bunch of wild women. Then you came back around again, and this time you squeezed your butter and maple syrup down onto Joni, along with pieces of paper, and then you ran down into East Ruffner. Is that the way it really happened? See, I never saw it, but I've heard it described. I don't know who cleaned her up. Yeah, I don't know who cleaned her up. But let me tell you, when they took down off of the dome of the rotunda those 4 paintings, which Dr. Thompson described in his article a couple of weeks ago, one of which was of Dr. Ruffner, superintendent of education in Virginia. Behind those paintings on the bare plaster of, see, the paintings were taken down. They're in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. They're going to be restored. They're going back up in the rotunda. They weren't destroyed in the fire. On the plaster, there are what look like, to a number of people, faces. You're going to have a better shot. Yeah, this is a little better shot. Can you see the outline of a human face or two anywhere in there? Could you show us, Mr. McCollum, where it is? There are the eyes. Yeah, right. I have lost them. On the right-hand corner of the phone? Yeah, that's really kind of spooky. I mean, these buildings have got to know a lot. You understand what I mean? All of the life that would have been inside them for all of those years. I mean, those brick walls can't be just dumb and mute. Surely they remember some of the things that went on in them. I'll tell you, there's one window. It's this window right here that Jesse Grant. Are any of you related by any chance to Jesse Grant in this room? Isn't Mrs. Grant here tonight? Didn't I see her? I thought I did. Sorry about that. Jesse Grant, local glass craftsman. One day he was working on some windows in West Ruffner, and he said, "Whoa, this is really interesting." This is West Ruffner, ground floor, and in the window glass there are letters and numbers. And they say, Fanny, Estelle, Lucy, 1887. You understand what I mean? So a number of students in one of my archaeology classes took this on as kind of a special project. And they concluded a number of things. I don't know if you're going to buy the conclusions or not. Okay, here's one thing they concluded. Dr. Carolyn Wells, using a microscope, determined the depth. And Fanny is only about 1/3 as deeply cut in the glass as Estelle, Lucy, and 1887. Those are about 3 times deeper than Fanny. Dr. Carolyn Wells said she hypothesizes that Fanny had a diamond. You know, maybe a stick pin or ring or something in 1887, and that Fanny said to her roommates, Estelle and Lucy, at that time West Ruffner was a dormitory, "Hey, let's cut our names into the window." So it's Fanny's diamond, so she went first, and she didn't press very hard. You understand what I mean? It's her diamond. And furthermore, she was right-handed. She put the butt of her hand up against the cam of the window. If she was left-handed, it would be over here. Do you understand? So we hypothesized Fanny was right-handed, and it was her diamond, and she wrote first, Fanny, and then gave it to Estelle, who scratched her name in, Lucy, who scratched it in, and either Estelle or Lucy put in 1887. There weren't all that many candidates for this mystery. Here's the graduating class of 1887. Now let's see, we've got an Estelle Ranson from Hicks Wharf, Virginia, and we've got a Fanny Smithson from Farmville, Virginia. But we don't have a Lucy. Doggone. There was a Lucy in the next class in 1888. Lucy Boswell is her name, and we guessed that she must have been a Lucy. She was the last one to write, so it makes sense she was the youngest one. This is the graduating class of 1887. Fanny and Estelle are in the picture, but we don't know which ones they are. Do you understand that? We used a 60-power magnifying lens looking at fingers and chokers and things, trying to find that diamond. And maybe she didn't have it on that day, but one of them is Fanny, and one of them is Estelle, and we just don't know which one it was. It's really strange to think that they left, literally, not only their image, but also their very name, as a part of that building. That window pane was saved. It now hangs in the library at Longwood University. It wasn't destroyed in the fire. And then we have the sadness. I often wonder if the rotunda knew what was going to happen to it in those several years when it was being renovated in advance of its reconstruction. It's so sad. You were there that night, Tuesday evening, 24 April 2001. Let's see, there were 181 firefighters involved. They utilized 3.7 million gallons of water. There were 11 separate alarms that were sounded. This fire is now being used as a case study by the Federal Emergency Management Agency as an example of something that could have been terrible in terms of loss of life, but for reasons having to do with luck, fortune, training, time of day, and so on, it resulted in only 2 minor injuries. So it's something to think that literally, I suppose, for a long time, people will be studying about what happened that night in Farmville, Virginia. That was about 1 hour before the vault of the rotunda crashed out. That was at 4:01 a.m. when the top of the rotunda fell in. And it took 2 days for those huge metal rings to cool off. It is estimated that they were heated to about 3,200 degrees Fahrenheit by the heat which went up into the rotunda and was trapped by the dome on top before the dome fell. The fire marshal's office sent away to a metallurgist, and they estimate that being the temperature. But you and I were there, and no sooner had things cooled off than you and I, in our desire not to allow the past to escape, started our peculiar and unusual kind of work, retrieving from the past those things that survived the fire and are in the ground. And someday, when the rotunda is restored, there will be examples of the things that used to be in the olden days. Thank you very much for the opportunity to come here this evening.
Thank you, Dr. Jordan. We really appreciate this. We always enjoy hearing your talks.
Bob, I can remember saying, Bob, you're never going to amount to anything. I was as wrong as I could be. Bob, you have amounted to a lot, and I applaud you.
Oh, thank you so much. We all do our part in our community to make it a better community. And I just want to thank all of you for coming out tonight. Jordan, thanks. And if I could just make an announcement about next month, our topic will be Prince Edward County's role in the war between the states. And we will have speaking with us next month, Chris Calkins from Petersburg National Battlefield. There has been a change in the date to accommodate him. We will meet instead of the third Tuesday, the second Tuesday, which is April 13th. And there's a little extra change in that Town Council will be meeting here in this building that night. So we will once again go to the Waterworks Players Theater to meet next month on the 13th, same time, 7 o'clock. So we hope to see you then. And thank you all once again.